A very good evening to you, wherever you are watching, listening from. This is Black Hot Fire News Update at 7 with me, Dimore. We start with Kenya, where Abraham Mwangi Nguyo, the owner of the tanker that exploded in Embakasi's Mradi area on February the 2nd, was on Thursday arraigned at the Milimani Law Courts. Following the court proceedings led by Principal Magistrate Martha Nanzushi, authorities were granted a 14-day detention period to conclude their investigations. While Nguyo did not oppose the detention, he requested to be held at an alternate police station. He will now be held at Capitol Hill Police Station for the said duration. His case will be mentioned on February the 28th, 2024. Report says that a gas explosion claimed around 7 lives and left over 250 others injured. The explosion was a result of greed from the driver of the ill-fated truck and traders who were being sold gas illegally. An amateur video clip captured by a resident of Mradi area showed moments before the gas explosion. Residents who were in a panic mode were heard pleading with motorists to avoid the area as gas fumes had already filled the area. A few minutes later, an explosion is heard and fire moves from one house to the other as firefighters fight hard to contain it. Embakasi East Member of Parliament Babu Owino has since called for the impeachment of Energy Cabinet Secretary Davis Chirchir for failing to honor a Senate summon to give answers on the tragic gas explosion.
Sakaja, having come under fire over who granted the permit of operations to the ill-fated gas refill station, has now directed that any other similar stations close to residential areas be shut down with immediate effect.
Kama kuna biashara kama hii inaendelea kwako na hujasema, wewe pia utajibu. Kote Nairobi, we know where such operation should be. Zimepatikana leo na zifunga zote ambazo ziko kwa maisha za watu.
The issue of the gas refill stations being close to residential areas had equally been raised by Azimio leader Raila Odinga.
Hivi tunaitwa specifications ambazo zimewekwa kutengeneza mitungi. Na vile wewe unaweza kutumia hiyo gesi.
Azimio allied leaders counter-pressed Sakaja to weed out those who gave out the operational permit to the ill-fated gas station, with Odinga picking on EPRA, citing negligence.
Governor Sakaja, wewe ndio unapeana leseni kwa biashara zote Kenya, kuanzia kwa mtu wa smoky mpaka kwa kampuni ya baba ile inatengeneza mitungi. Sasa leo utatuambia watu wako walikuwa wapi? Kama sio kila siku kungangana na watu wa smoky, kungangana watu ya mayai, kungangana na watu ya ndizi, kungangana na wananchi wakipiga starehe yao. Hiyo ndio kazi mlichagua Sakaja kufanya. Mwambie shame on you.
This is a result of negligence of duty. This is an accident which should not have taken place. If the authorities in charge the responsibility of inspection and supervision did their jobs.
Sakaja has put his officers on notice.
Maisha ni muhimu kuliko pesa. Tafadhali tuwajibike kwa ile kazi ambayo tunafanya. Yeah? Sema hiyo. Kazi inafanyika usiku, gasi inaekwa, tunaangalia tunaficha.
Raila wants the government to compensate victims of the gas explosion, challenging the president to relocate those left homeless to the affordable housing units.
500,000 for each and every. We are saying to the two of them, give me affordable houses and then go to rally or political party.
Meanwhile, 4 suspects in the Embakasi gas explosion case were arraigned in court. The GCI wants the 4, Derek Kimathi, Joseph Makau, David Warunya, and Marian Kioko, remanded for 21 more days till the finality of the investigations.
That was a video courtesy of NTV Kenya. And we saw a rallying call by the opposition leader Raila Odinga, who there claims that he's looking for a way to leave Kenyan politics, with him eyeing a United Nations a top job at the United Nations. I'm following on the story and I'm going to report on that tomorrow on Raila Odinga looking for a way to leave. He is allegedly the opposition leader, who has been the opposition leader for so long, by the way, is allegedly looking for a way out of politics, and he's currently eyeing a top UN job. I'm going to report on that tomorrow. I've been following on that development today, and I'll give you more details on that tomorrow. Anyway, moving on. The four men who visited Maradona, Kevin Kiptum's father, days before the athlete died, presented themselves at the DCI office in Kaptagat on Wednesday morning for questioning. The quartet, who were summoned after Kiptum's father denied knowing them, surrendered to police in Kaptagat and were ferried to the area police headquarters in Iten, where they recorded statements on why they were looking for the late Kiptum. Details have now emerged about the mission to the late Kiptum's home. The four men reportedly sought out Kiptum to discuss particulars of a shillings 45 million contract signed between the late Maradona and a Chinese company. Sources say that the athlete had opted to pay back the Chinese company, but the company was only interested in having the athlete fulfill his contractual obligation and not a legal battle. So they sent the four to negotiate a deal. According to Elgeyo Marakwet CCIO Joshua Chelal, the Chinese company was to supply sports equipment to Kiptum to be used during the Chicago Marathon, and it is alleged that Kiptum opted to use a different brand and not the Chinese brand as agreed. This prompted the Chinese company to send the four men to negotiate whether they could be compensated or whether they would be given another opportunity to supply Kiptum equipment for the forthcoming Rotterdam race slated for April 2024. The quartet's lawyer Kipyegon Langat, however, says that his clients are well known to Kiptum's family, further adding that the four had had a fruitful discussion with the late Maradona during their interaction. The lawyer's clients are not under arrest but are required to report back to the CCIO on Friday as investigations continue. In the meantime, burial preparations of the late Kiptum have begun, with the organizing committee indicating that the late athlete will be buried at his home on Saturday, February 24th.
On to the sad story. Headquarters in Iten. Kiptum through a tragic... A day after... the death of Kelvin Kiptum through a tragic road accident near Kaptagat Forest, Kiptum's father made an allegation that sparked an uproar throughout the country.
Walikuja 4 days from now, walikuja sema ati hata sitageta niseme hiyo watu wengine natoka Siwa, walikuwa watu 4. Hata niko na namba plate ya kari. Na niko na namba ya simu. Sijui alikuwa anataka kufanyia nini kijana yangu, I don't know. Yeah. Daga nikaambia mnipatie mimi vitu ya kuonyesha wewe ni mtu ya serikali.
On Wednesday morning, the four presented themselves to the DCI office in Kaptagat, but were then escorted to Iten, where they recorded statements. Details have now emerged about their mission to the late Kiptum's home.
My clients were present at the Kiptum's family for a good cause. They were welcomed, they were received by the father of the deceased, the mother, and the widow. And they were even given food. They stayed there for almost 3 hours. The meeting was successful.
Their lawyer, Kipyegon Lagat, says his clients are well known to the family. They had a fruitful discussion, shared a meal, and even took photos before leaving the compound. After the visit to Kiptum's family, it was agreed that the matter is concluded. Only for things to take a new turn when the father claimed that these were strangers who came to his compound and he had no idea what they had come to do.
Nilistuka tu juzi niliposikia kwamba hao walikuwa strangers, na mimi nilipeana namba yangu, tuliongea, nikaji-identify mpaka nyumbani, mpaka mzee akajua kwetu.
The dispute in question involves a 45 million shillings contract signed between the late Kiptum and a Chinese company.
Our conscience is very clear kwamba whatever we were dealing with was something that was very good and was something that was going to even help this family.
Sources told Citizen TV that the athlete had opted to pay back the Chinese company, but the company was only interested in having the athlete fulfill his contractual obligation. They were not interested in a legal battle, and they sent the famous four to negotiate a deal.
They sent the four men to negotiate if they could be compensated or they would be given another opportunity to supply more equipments for the forthcoming Rotterdam race.
The four are not under arrest but are required to report back to the CCIO on Friday as investigations continue. In the meantime, burial preparations of the late Kiptum have begun, with the organizing committee indicating that the late
So that is a new twist in Kiptum's case, with details emerging that he had allegedly signed a 45 million contract with some Chinese corporation, and he had bailed out on them. He had decided that he's not going to advertise for them and he's going to use a different brand. So we hope that the DCI will get to the bottom of the issue, and that is a fresh twist. And now we head to Sudan, where Sudanese have been left in the dark after a telecommunication blackout. A communication network blackout in Sudan blamed on the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the PRS, has hobbled aid delivery and left the war-weary population of almost 50 million unable to make payments or contact the outside world. The RSF has been fighting Sudan's army for control of the country since April, in a war that has killed thousands, displaced almost 8 million, and sparked warnings of famine. Sources indicate that the RSF began shutting down the network on February 5th, completing the blackout 2 days later. After 10 months of conflict, the RSF controls most of the capital, Khartoum, and some of Sudan's infrastructure that is based there, including the headquarters of the telecoms providers. The sources said that the RSF soldiers had threatened the blackout unless engineers restored service to the western Darfur region, which the RSF control and which has experienced a blackout for months. A telecom industry official blamed the situation there on lack of fuel and dangerous working conditions. A government source said that the National Telecom Authority was working with companies to restore services as soon as possible, denying any negotiation with the RSF. Fighting continued in the capital and west of the country, with the head of the RSF claiming gains in a speech on Sunday. The United Nations also said fighting had flared on the edges of the densely populated city of Al-Fashir.
Virtually all sectors of society have been affected by the ongoing outage. Virtually all sectors of society have been affected by the ongoing outages. Worryingly for the army, which is fighting the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, its new wartime capital, Port Sudan, hasn't been spared from the blackouts. It's also where many have fled to seek refuge. With most banks out of service, people have been unable to access financial services or banking applications. This is particularly worrying for many families who rely on remittances from abroad to get by, amid worsening economic conditions brought on by the conflict. Meanwhile, communication blackouts mean many people are unable to maintain contact with family living in other parts of the country.
Our lives have become difficult due to breakdown in communication. For me personally, I have struggled to communicate with my family, relatives, and friends all over Sudan. This issue is very, very stressful for us.
A week before the internet outage, my son fell ill. I didn't know what to do. Should I leave my job here and travel to them, or what should I do? I was truly confused.
Economic experts estimate that the interruption of internet and communications networks will cause millions of dollars in losses to the banking sector and businesses. Insurance companies have already begun counting losses.
We were greatly affected by the communication interruption because we lost contact with the customers who deal with us. Many of them want to insure and make their insurance claims now.
The disruptions have also affected the government's income, with revenue collection paralysis at ports, the Passport Authority, Civil Registry, Traffic Department, and other government departments. It is also threatening the financing of the upcoming summer agricultural season, worsening concerns about potential famine in many parts. An official in the Sudanese Communications Services blamed the RSF for cutting off communications throughout Sudan. In a video posted on social media, he said it came at a time when the organization had been repairing and maintaining its network in the full state. Network towers, power lines, and other infrastructure have been damaged in a war that has raged now for almost a year. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also condemned the disruption that has affected much of Sudan. The RSF has yet to respond to the allegations. Wanjamugai.
That is what has been happening in Sudan with the telecoms blackout. The citizens in Sudan can no longer be able to communicate because apparently all communication has been cut in Sudan. And let us now head to Nigeria on some news we have been following from last week, with at least 50 people were kidnapped last week by armed bandits. At least 35 women are missing after kidnappers seized guests returning from a wedding in northwest Nigeria, according to reports. The mass kidnapping in Katsina State is the largest in a series of recent abductions across Africa's most populous country. Police spokesman Abubakar Aliyu said suspected armed bandits ambushed and kidnapped about 35 women coming back from a wedding in the Sabua area on Thursday night. The state's internal security commissioner, Nasiru Muaz, gave a higher figure, saying more than 50 people were seized on the way back to the Mari village after escorting the bride to the groom's home. Officials who visited the village reported that at least 53 people were taken. The commissioner urged residents to avoid traveling at night and said security personnel were trying to find and rescue the captives. Sorry for that. Kidnapping for ransom is a major problem in Nigeria, with criminal gangs targeting highways, apartments, and even snatching pupils from schools. Gangs known locally as bandits operate out of bases hidden in forest, according to the northwest and across the northwest and central states. At the start of the year, criminals abducted 5 younger sisters near the capital Abuja and killed one when a ransom deadline passed, sparking a national outcry. Last week, kidnappers attacked a Nigerian school bus and abducted 5 children along with their teachers in southwest Ekiti State. 2 traditional rulers were killed in a separate attack in the same state last Monday, while gunmen shot dead another traditional monarch and kidnapped his wife in Kwara State on Thursday. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu came to power last year, promising to address insecurity in Nigeria. The country is grappling with jihadists in the northeast, criminal militias in the northwest, and a flare-up of intercommunal violence in central states. Nigerian risk consultancy SBM Intelligence said that it had recorded 3,964 people abducted in Nigeria since Tinubu took office in May.
Kidnapping and killings have returned back to Nigeria's federal capital, Abuja, after over 10 months of silence from the bandits. Bandit last week attacked travelers on the Abuja-Kaduna highway and abducted over 30. Also, 10 persons were kidnapped in Dusi-Aladi area of the FCT Abuja after gunmen reportedly dressed as military men invaded a community. Some residents say the government should bring a lasting peace and solution to the lingering insecurity in the region.
I'm talking to you. I'm afraid to talk to you because we don't know who may be the next person. So we appeal to the government to help force security here and the whole country.
Especially these Fulani people, they are the ones, mainly being the problem of many things that is happening here. Sometimes you see them with arms, but nobody, to talk or to say anything. They will be walking freely with a machete or whatever. So we need to talk. At least if they have somebody that is controlling them.
A security expert says the government should give an account of the reasons why insecurity in the FCT has increased.
Okay, when we begin to have insecurity in Niger, in Kogi State, in Nasarawa State, in Plateau States, it tells you that even the Federal Capital Territory is not secured because these are direct borders that have to relate with Federal Capital Territory on a daily basis. People travel.
He noted there are systematic and political corruption, majorly by the elites.
It looks like I lost the video that I was sharing for the last few minutes, but it was about what has been happening in Nigeria with the mass kidnappings coming back, and at least 50 people got kidnapped last week as they were returning from a wedding, and that was intelligence reports from SBM said that more than 3,964, that is about 4,000 people, had been abducted in Nigeria since Tinubu took office, that is in May. Now let us head to Ghana, where Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo has sacked his finance minister Afori Atta as the West African country eyes economic recovery. Mr. Afori Atta has been in office since 2017 and has faced criticism for Ghana's current economic crisis, the worst to hit the country in decades. In the height of the crisis in 2022, the inflation surpassed 50% and the government defaulted on loan payments. The Ghanaian cedi plummeted, with the West African gold, oil and cocoa producer being in deep debt distress. Afori Atta faced criticism with calls to resign from street protesters, and both opposition and ruling party MPs survived. No reason was given for his sacking, and change that affected 12 other ministers of state. Mohamed Amin, who previously served as Deputy Energy Minister and Minister of States in the Finance Ministry, was on Wednesday appointed as Mr. Afori Atta's replacement. Mr. Adam is expected to oversee the ongoing shillings 3 billion IMF economic recovery program. Adam is expected to oversee the ongoing shillings 3 billion IMF economic recovery program, as well as the debt restructuring negotiation with the country's commercial creditor. 12 other ministers were reshuffled in the changes. President Akufo-Addo terms comes to an end this year as the elections will be held on December. So that was President Akufo-Addo of Ghana firing the finance minister. Ghana has been in a deep debt distress. It has defaulted on most of its loans, and of course, it had to get a bailout from the IMF a few months ago. And now, the finance minister, who everybody has been calling for the firing, was fired by the president, whose term will come to an end in December this year. Yeah, so I was trying to share a video of the same, but the video is not available. But that is what has been happening in Ghana. So let us continue with still on Ghana. Ghana has been forced to suspend plans to implement a new 15% tax on power following a public uproar that that it will worsen the cost of living crisis. The VAT was to be levied on domestic consumers of electricity. It was a measure to boost its revenue after pressure from the International Monetary Fund. As I said, Ghana is under deep pressure from the International Monetary Fund, which actually reportedly bailed Ghana out because Ghana had defaulted on its loans, not because it wanted to, but because it didn't have money to pay the loans. The inflation had hit a high and Ghana didn't have funds to pay the loans, and it had to default. So the country's economy was plunging down a spiral, and it had to go to IMF, as most countries in Africa always do, going back to the debt trap. And when it went back to the IMF bailed it out. And so this was a measure to boost its revenue after pressure from the International Monetary Fund, and it caused a nationwide uproar with rallying calls and for protests from labor unions. Authorities now say the task has been put on hold until talks are held to resolve the dispute. It comes a few days after the government started to implement a fuel emission levy for carbon emission produced by the petrol or diesel-powered vehicles in the country. Critics fear that, and rightly so, that the additional taxes could have a ripple effect on the struggling economy, further intensifying the cost of living crisis that has already pushed up the prices of necessities like fuel. Ghana is currently undergoing through its worst economic crisis in a generation, and the government was forced to sign a 3 billion bailout program with the IMF last year. That was what I was talking about. The government signed a 3 billion bailout program with the IMF last year because apparently Ghana was going down, and they had to, they say when you are in a hole, you have to stop digging. That is the first step you do. When you are in a hole, you stop digging further. But Ghana went ahead and dug further. It was in a debt crisis because of the loans, and so to settle the debt crisis, it went ahead and borrowed another 3 billion from the IMF to deal with the debts. And now for that, it has to impose levies and taxes on things such as fuel. They are even taxing carbon emission so that they can be able to pay the debts to the IMF. Let us now head to Central African Republic with a sad development where Central African Republic said that about 10,000 children are still fighting alongside armed groups. Mathe Kirima, the Minister for Family and Gender, said in a statement that children are still being recruited as fighters more than 10 years after civil war broke out. So in Central African Republic, children are still being used in wars. So let me share a video of the same.
The warlord Joseph Kony borderlands of the Central African Republic, where more than 15 armed groups are fighting to control the country's resources. As head of the Lord's Resistance Army, Kony has been indicted by the International Criminal Court for, among other crimes, abducting and recruiting children.
I did not abduct anybody, and there's no any children in my position or in my camp.
According to the United Nations, over the last 5 years, at least 13,000 children in the Central African Republic have been kidnapped and turned into soldiers.
One of the most powerful rebel groups here is the Popular Front for the Renaissance of the Central African Republic, or the FDRC. It's made up of people, Muslim minority, who fought the Lord's Resistance Army many times. They claim that they don't use child soldiers, but while we were there, we met 2 boys who'd been captured after separate battles with rival groups. Instead of being released, they've been made to fight. We spoke with Mohammed Saeed, a founding member of the FPRC and one of its most senior generals in Bria.
Can you describe what happened when you fought with the LRA and captured the young fighter?
Les gens de la LRA sont venus appréhender, veut dire attraper les personnes dans leur village. C'est à cause de ça qu'ils sont en train de circuler et chercher à monopoliser cette zone. Il arrête seulement les vivres, les enfants, et le bagage c'est fini, il part. C'est à cause de ça qu'on avait pris nos hommes pour pouvoir le poursuivre. Et puis, ils se sont combattus et ils ont récupéré les enfants.
Didier used to be with the LRA, and Abakar was taken from the anti-Balaka forces.
I will be tackling child soldiers in the Central African Republic tomorrow on a special feature. So I'm sure we're going to watch more of that video and others on what has really been happening in the Central African Republic with children being drafted into wars. Instead of the children being in schools, most of them are actually in the ground fighting. So I'm going to be covering that tomorrow on the child fighters in the Central African Republic. And so we end the update with news from Haiti, where Haiti says it is working on an agreement with Kenya to secure the long-awaited police deployment. Haiti's government announced on Wednesday that it is working on an official agreement with Kenyan officials to secure the long-awaited deployment of a police force from the East African country. High-ranking officials from both countries met in the US for 3 days this week to draft a memorandum of understanding and set a deadline for the arrival of the Kenyan police forces. The closed-door meeting was held weeks after a Kenyan court blocked the UN-backed deployment of police to Haiti to help fight a surge in gang violence, saying it was unconstitutional. It is not clear if or how a memorandum of association would circumvent the court's ruling, which the president made clear that he would defy. The Haiti government, in a statement, said that the decision on the text should come early next week, as well as its signature by both parties. So the Haiti government said that the decision on what the meeting was about will come as early as next week with a signature from both parties. So that means we should expect the Kenyan police to be in Haiti within the next few weeks, with the signatures coming next week. The deployment to Haiti was requested by Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry in October 2022 and approved by the UN Security Council a year later. It has, however, encountered multiple legal obstacles as gang warfare in Haiti's capital continues to grow. One of the legal warfares was the Kenyan court that banned and stopped the deployment, saying it was unconstitutional, but the president came out and said he was going to defy the orders. And let us finish with Nigeria doing the most Nigerian thing. So apparently Nigeria's ex-president Muhammadu Buhari had his signature forged and about $6 million withdrawn. Nigeria has appealed to Interpol for assistance in apprehending 3 suspects accused of orchestrating a $6.2 million theft from the central bank. The funds were allegedly siphoned using forged signatures, including that of former President Muhammadu Buhari. Authorities are suspecting a collusion might have occurred between suspects and Nigeria's former central bank chief, Godwin Emefiele. Emefiele is already facing trial on 20 charges, including the illicit receipt of the stolen funds. However, he maintains his innocence while he is still out on bail. The funds were withdrawn in cash in January last year, a few months before Mr. Buhari's term ended. And on a developing story that I've just received, Senegalese President Macky Sall has just had his first interview ever since he postponed the Senegalese election. So he says his main aim is to leave Senegal in peace at the end of his term. In his first interviews ever since announcing the postponement of the presidential election, Senegal's Macky Sall says his decision to postpone the elections was necessary to prevent worse election chaos. He was speaking amidst chaos and protests that have erupted after the postponement of the election, with many citizens airing the sentiment that Macky Sall is a dictator. He says he believes Senegal needed a dialogue to prevent things from escalating and a crisis from emerging. This comes days after the Senegalese government banned the protest as well as shut down the internet to prevent what they referred to as chaos and unrest. So nobody in Senegal could be watching us right now because they don't have internet. So that is the second country in Africa that is going through the same thing. But it is even worse in Sudan, because in Sudan it is a total telecoms blackout. They've shut down everything, a total telecoms blackout. But in Senegal, it is just the internet. So you are now up to date on what has been happening throughout Africa, each and every country in Africa, on a night where Macky Sall has spoken and said that he wants to leave Senegal in peace. Nigeria's president, former president Buhari, signature has been used to withdraw funds from the central bank on a night where a lot has been happening, with about 10,000 child soldiers being used in Central African Republic, as reports have emerged. About 50 people have been kidnapped in Nigeria allegedly by bandits. A lot has been happening. What else has happened in Africa today? Haiti has announced that the signatures will be signed by next week, and that means Kenyan police forces are expected in Haiti as early as next week. It is also a night where Ghana has fired its Minister of Finance. Ghana's president has fired the Minister of Finance. This is after Ghana is going through a tough economic time, and it had to go to the IMF for a 3 billion bailout. This was after Ghana defaulted on its loans last year, not because it is really brave and wants to face the IMF. It was because it had no money to pay the loans. And therefore, Ghana is currently going through its worst economic crisis in a generation, and the government was forced to sign a 3 billion bailout program with the IMF last year. And now the president has realized that the finance minister is to blame for this, apparently, and he has fired him. So that is all we had on the Black Hot Fire news update. A look into what has been happening in Africa. It is 40 minutes past 7 p.m. That is East African time. And Jiba Jaba was with me, and he was telling me he's late. And he's saying peace, family. Peace to you too, Jiba Jaba. You can rewatch the news update to see what has been happening throughout Africa. Today, the news were not as sad as they were yesterday. Yesterday, all the news were about deaths and deaths and deaths. At least today, apart from Nigeria doing the most Nigerian thing and using the former president's signature to steal from the central bank, it has not been a bad day for Africa. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the rest of your night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are watching from. See you tomorrow on the Black Hot Fire News Update. It's been a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen.